Hey guys, it's Sandro here, and today's detail is on quite a rare Nissan Skyline R32 V-spec 2. Now in all the years I've been detailing, this was my largest, most time-consuming and most challenging job in excess of 100 hours, and also by far the most time I've spent shooting and editing a video. So I really hope you guys enjoy it, and please share it and tell me what you think about it in the comments. We'll get straight into part 1 with a pre-detail inspection to see what sort of condition the car is in. And I'll jump back in shortly to run you through the wash and decontamination stages, as well as fill you in on this job as a whole. So sit back and I hope you enjoy it. So as I start cleaning the wheel wells, I'll just give you guys a little info on this job. Now as you would have seen and you'll continue to see throughout this detail, this car needs a lot of work. Not only on the paint correction side, but also in this decontamination stage, as overall this car has definitely been neglected in the past, with severe amounts of embedded and infused grime that just doesn't happen in a matter of months or even years, but takes decades of neglect to get to this stage. And a basic decontamination wash just isn't going to address it. So a more involved and time-consuming process is what's needed and what you guys will see. The owner of this car is a huge JDM fan, and he did in fact import this car from Japan himself. And although he has quite a few iconic JDM cars, this R32 is his favourite, as well as being the one in the worst visual condition. And his goal was to keep the car as factory original as possible, but to breathe some new life into it, which is where I come in. Now, based on a pre-inspection and some paint measurements that just weren't great at all, I made no promises other than I'll do my very best, and that's exactly what I did and all I could promise. I'll get more into the paint once it's ready for correction, but for now I'll take you through the 2-day wash and decontamination stage, which is also the most time I've ever spent decontaminating a customer's car. So as you can see, this was a wheels off detail, and I kept the car in the wash bay rather than using my car hoist, as I was going to give the wheel wells the clean of their life. So using both the degreaser and the wheel cleaner, I started by giving the wheel wells a nice generous amount of them to start breaking down those decades of grime. And as usual, I'll have all the products I'm using listed in the description box. The next step was using my Tornador air tool with a dilution of the degreaser to help dislodge, break down and blast away that grime. And after quite a bit of time reapplying and retreating every area, that was followed by a thorough pressure rinse down. Now there's two reasons why I like to start off cleaning areas like wheel wells in this manner, which is firstly that after applying and reapplying the chemicals and water for a good 10 to 15 minutes, also ensuring that the areas don't dry up, this massively helps soften and remove the more stubborn particles, and the other reason is that the pre-soak and use of the Tornador is completely touchless and safe. So rather than grabbing a brush to start with, that's going to grind all that dirt, metal brake dust and road grime into the plastics, metals and painted components, if you remove the majority of them as I have in a touchless method, then once you start using brushes and wash mitts, it's a much safer and even way more effective process in removing the leftover grime. The next step was cleaning the rims themselves. As you'll see, the process I use for cleaning rims is quite similar to the wheel wells when I'm doing a wheels off clean. It's essentially all about trying to be as safe as possible in removing as much grime as I can in a touchless manner, but also trying to be as effective as I can in completely stripping them down to bare paint. The only real difference between them, apart from using softer brushes for the rims, is that I gave them a final clay to pick up some lingering bonded particles. I'll also add that this was just the first decontamination stage for both the rims and the wheel wells, so you'll see me further cleaning, polishing and coating them in the up and coming videos as we take an even closer look at them. The next stage was the door jambs. One thing I want to help explain is the difference between looser or caked on mud and dirt that looks messy and bad, but is actually quite easy to remove with a pressure washer or just a light brushing, compared to fused on or baked on grime that isn't quite as obvious, but can be an absolute nightmare to remove. And that's exactly the sort of grime that I was dealing with here. And it was also one of the customer's largest concerns, as much as he tried to get them clean himself, he just couldn't seem to remove that black gunk staining that was all over them. Now, as you guys have a look at my process, it's important to mention that every car and its condition is different, and as such I'm always adapting my technique to suit each job. But one thing that stays true to me is that I'm always looking for the least aggressive method that will give me the results I'm after, and that's rarely the quickest process, but rather a more time-consuming one. In truth, the easiest and quickest way for me to remove that grime would be to use some paint thinners, but it's also by far the most aggressive method that will remove the paint along with the grime. So my process was starting with my degreaser and then using the Tornador air tool to blast the looser dirt, that was followed by brushing the door jambs and then using a tar and adhesive remover with a softer brush, followed by a reapplication of the chemical with a softer brush. So in essence, it's all about removing the dirt and fused on grime in layers and taking my time with it. And the longer the chemicals are allowed to set and break down that contamination, the safer and more effective the result will be. Now, in certain areas, such as around many of the exterior trims, I just wasn't able to completely remove all that gunk. But you'll see in the coming videos that I ended up using a microfiber pad and a compound to clean it off, which is still far less aggressive than resorting to using thinners, which should always be a last resort in my opinion. One final point I'll add is that in many cases, it's this kind of grime that builds up around panel trims and panel edges that retains moisture and ultimately leads to rust and corrosion in those areas, as the water isn't able to dry up as it would normally. So ensuring that these areas are regularly cleaned with just some car soap and a detailing brush once or twice a year so that the grime doesn't attach itself to them will massively prevent rust in those common areas in the future. The next step was the pre-soak foam. Now, it's not like covering your vehicle in foamed up car soap is some kind of magical cleaning solution, but I want to explain that it's a fantastic way to start softening up the existing grime so that when you do use your pressure washer to blast the surface clean, it becomes a much more effective process, especially if you use a safe but more effective strip car wash detergent. And without that foaming ability, any detergent or chemical you use is just going to dry up faster, meaning that it can't dwell as long and be quite as effective, or you will start staining the paint, which tends to happen when any chemical is allowed to dry on the surface. So on its own, a snow foam isn't going to do all that much, but place it at the start of a more in-depth wash or decontamination process, and it's a fantastic way to begin that cleaning process, as it will allow the following steps to be both safer and more effective. The first initial pressure rinse down is by far the most important and most inadequately performed step in my experience. I just see too many instances during this step where the person or detailer is just trying to rinse off the snow foam or wave the pressure gun all over the place, rather than just concentrating on methodically stripping the existing grime off each panel section by section. Your goal here is to run the pressure washer beam over every inch of the vehicle's surface and to lift off as much grime as possible, rather than just rinsing or blowing off the looser dirt. So as mentioned earlier, the pre-soak foam is going to start breaking down and softening up that surface gunk. But if you're not being as effective as you can during this initial pressure rinsing stage, then it is largely a waste of time, and also the reason why you're most likely going to be inflicting swirls in the next hand wash stage. Next was the hand wash stage. Now if a vehicle is well maintained and has a quality wax, sealant or coating on it, the vast majority of the existing grime will be removed with just a snow foam and a thorough pressure rinse down. But for a vehicle such as this, it's all about removing that dirt build up in layers to make it as safe and effective as possible. And this hand wash stage was all about removing that next layer of grime. Now I've said many times over in the past that it doesn't really matter all that much which safe car washing method you use, such as the 2-bucket method I'm using here, as all of them have pros and cons. But what does matter is that you do in fact use a safe car washing method, and that you use it with a good technique, which is always a balance of safety, efficiency and effectiveness. So that means using very little pressure and not scrubbing back and forth, but using single overlapping swipes and constantly rinsing or swapping out your wash mitts. And if there is some dirt or gunk that just won't come off, you shouldn't be using brute force to try and remove it, as you're going to scratch the paint. You're much better off just trying to tackle it using other chemicals or claying methods, which you'll see as I progress. I don't wanna know if it's the way to find it. Keeping at a distance from the place we both knew. Trying to forget of all the times that I screwed. Yes, I'm ripping what I sow. And everything around me keep on moving and so slow. Unfamiliar faces start to catch me in the flow. Buzzing dirty music fly around me like a crow. Yes, I'm ripping what I sow. I don't wanna know if there's a way to
distant from the place we both knew. Trying to forget about the times that I screwed. Guess I'm reaping what I sow. And everything around me keep on moving us so slow. Unfamiliar faces try to catch me in the flow. Buzzing dirty music fly around me like a crow. Guess I'm reaping what I sow.
After the hand wash stage and another rinse down, my next step was to brush out the trims and panel seams. There's trapped dirt in these areas that you simply can't access with a wash mitt, and if left untreated, it simply won't flush out with your pressure washer. So brushing trims is all about getting your detergent or chemical into that trapped grime with a little agitation to encourage it to break down and dislodge itself. In many cases, your car wash detergent with just a soft detailing brush should be enough to remove it if it's done every now and then. But in this case, I ended up using a mix of my car wash detergent together with my degreaser and a tar remover to give me the extra cleaning power that I needed due to the black and brown staining around many of those trims. Now in some cases I was able to remove a significant amount of it, but in many other cases I just wasn't able to entirely remove it. As bad as it was in the door jambs, it was way worse on some of the exterior trims. So you'll see how I ended up removing all of it in the next paint correction stage. After another pressure rinse down, I had a good feel of the paint and could definitely feel a massive amount of environmental fallout on the paint, almost like a fine grit sandpaper. So without question, this car needed further decontamination steps to remove it. After an application and reapplication of an iron remover chemical and working it in with a microfiber cloth, the paint definitely started feeling a little better, with many of the smaller fallout particles dissolved and removed. But in all honesty, there was still so many larger ones remaining that would require a mechanical claying process to remove. This step was followed by a tar removal chemical treatment on the lower panels of the car to address quite a bit of traffic film buildup, but it also had the additional benefit of removing at least some of the paint staining and fused on grime in those areas. Although the chemical decontamination steps definitely removed a significant amount of the bonded grime on this vehicle, it was just crazy how much more fused on gunk was still remaining on the paint as I started claying. Literally within 5 to 10 seconds of claying quite a small section, my clay bar was full of grime, and this wasn't just environmental fallout, but also a mix of fused on dirt that probably took decades of neglect to get to this stage. So at least for the top panels of the car, this was an extremely time consuming process, as I had to fold my clay bar to a clean section every 10 seconds or so as it became completely filled with the grime it was pulling off the paint. Now, this was a more extreme circumstance, but if you're faced with this sort of level of bonded particles, you really need to work your clay for shorter periods and constantly fold it to clean sections before continuing, or you will without a doubt completely scratch the life out of the paint in no time. After the claying process was finally completed, which I'll add was another record for the most time I've spent claying a vehicle, it was given a final pressure rinse down, and the entire vehicle was blown dry, also removing all the trapped water in the intricate areas. The final stage was an alcohol-based wipe down. You need to appreciate that after such an elaborate decontamination process, there's always going to be all sorts of detergent and chemical residue remaining on the paint. So an IPA or isopropyl based wipe down is a great way to remove that lingering residue so it won't interfere or negatively impact the next paint correction stage. As I finish wiping down this R32, I'll just sum up this whole process and video. I'll start by saying that I didn't expect to spend 2 long days washing and decontaminating this car, as it's not exactly common for me to spend more than half a day to a day at most. But as I've explained in many past videos, I'm never just going through the motions of cleaning a vehicle, but rather always assessing my results and letting that dictate how I proceed. It just turns out that this car needed a lot more work to strip it back down to as close as I could get it to bare paint and trims without being overly aggressive and causing further damage. So I'm always focusing on 3 fundamental rules, which are firstly being as safe as possible, as I'm being trusted to detail this vehicle and not inflict further damage due to negligence. That's followed by effectiveness, in that I have a goal I'm working towards achieving in the vehicle's cleanliness. And lastly is efficiency, in that I have to use my time wisely with good productivity. But that can't come at the cost of hurting my first 2 rules of safety and effectiveness, as there would be no point in cutting my time in half if it wasn't a safe and effective result. I'll lastly add that the reason it's so important to remove as much grime as possible during the decontamination stage is that it's preparation for the paint correction stage. And to put it simply, poor preparation in this initial stage is also going to give you poor results in the paint correction and paint protection stages that follow. And it also means that those stages end up causing you issues that would have never even been issues if you had just done this stage and process correctly. I hope you guys stay tuned for the next video in this series, where I'll tackle the most time-consuming area of paint correction on this amazing car, which I can tell you right now was quite a challenge. As always, I really hope you guys enjoyed and found this video useful. Please share this video, like, comment, and subscribe to this channel to show your support for this content, and I'll see you guys soon.